Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 135, and I had the pleasure of talking to Erica Bonham, a licensed professional counselor, certified EMDR consultant and trainer, yoga instructor, and somatic healing expert based in Colorado. She specializes in trauma recovery for LGBTQ community, spiritual abuse survivor, and those impacted by social injustice. Integrating mindfulness as part of her work and the nervous system healing. Erica is also a published author, co-leads racial trauma workshops, and is currently finishing her book, Always Enough, Never Done, Embodied Badass Healing. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you for watching and listening. Hello and welcome to Erica. How are you, Erica?
Hi, I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on your awesome podcast. I'm
You're,
excited.
you're welcome. And I'm excited to have you on because you bring such a unique experience to the table for us to have this conversation from a psychotherapist perspective. But I also know that you've stepped into and tapping into the spiritual world, which is my hometown, in bringing those two together and supporting people on their own trauma. However, you've been through quite an experience yourself to get you to where you are today. So I'm curious in all that you have witnessed and all that you have experienced for yourself and stepping into a place of supporting others on their journey. What do you believe about yourself, and do you feel it defines who Erica is today?
Wow, that is an expansive question. All
I
right.
know.
I love
Yes.
it.
Yes.
So, man, I think what I believe about myself today is so vastly different from how I navigated probably the first 40 years of my life, right?
Mm.
So I shared in our previous conversation, I'm an adoptee, um, and I'm also a queer identified person, but I actually think the adoption, even though I was adopted very young, I was adopted at 7 days old. My adoptive parents were, there was no abuse, there was no major traumas, but I think which is true for a lot of adoptees, our nervous systems are really pumped. The pump is primed to view everything through the lens of rejection. We really feel, and I felt for many years, that there was something inherently rejectable about
Mhm.
me, something
Mhm.
inherently broken, something inherently wrong, not enoughness, not unworthiness, just something that wasn't right.
Mhm.
And even though I knew consciously that I was a pretty good person, right? That I
Yeah.
tried to help people, that I wasn't actively trying to cause harm to anyone. Um, the undercurrent of my subconscious self-beliefs was really organized around shame. And I think, and of course that still shows up from time to time, that there's a part of that I might carry with me throughout this human life. But man, has it shifted a lot. And so I think what I try to believe about myself now, and what is getting to my heart and my bones and my spirit and my younger parts are starting to believe more, is what I actually believe is true of all beings, which is that we are always and already enough, lovable, worthy, and inherently and divinely connected to every other living thing
Mhm.
on this planet. And
Mhm.
and that is not earned or negotiable with anything or anyone outside of
Mhm.
ourselves. And
Hmm.
so it's actually just it's a remembering
That's right.
of who we are
Yeah.
rather than trying to convince ourselves
Yeah.
of something.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is a very different way of being because there's a narrative out there, there's a world out there that tells us we're broken, and that disconnect comes from other places within our control. And to a certain degree, that is true to a certain degree. But in other capacities, it's not. It's not in that a bandage can fix.
Right. Right.
It's our journey within self to go inwards and lean into this. I'm going to call it this bigger, powerful, higher energy,
Hmm.
universe, source, God, whatever name you want to give it, something bigger than you and I that is in that has that domain and has that control. And that's what we've to be in relationship rather than a prescription drug.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I've heard it described just again from that spiritual lens, and I really have my feet in both worlds, right? Of
Yep,
human
yep,
world, human nervous system, human trauma, validating pain, validating the experience of the brutality of what it means sometimes to be human,
yep.
and bridging that more spiritual realm of like that always and already enough and our true nature really
Hmm.
can't be touched by any of that.
Hmm.
Uh, and I liked this. I can't remember where I heard it, but I liked this sort of spiritual lens as from a soul's perspective. We kind of come here to experience contrast. We come here to
Yes.
experience this this sort of illusion, this like, what does this feel to be like different or separate from, or like tasting chocolate cake is kind of interesting, and
Hmm.
like, oh, this experience of contrast.
Right.
And I've heard it described as like, if our true nature is divine, our true nature is like a white light. But if you're a white light in a white room, it's really hard to understand your true nature. And so we
Absolutely.
come here to experience contrast.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that actually helps us really understand the always and already truth
Yep.
on a deeper level. And,
Yep.
and I and I, and I think we talked about this too in our previous conversation. I don't ever want to weaponize that or use that in a way that's like, well, your soul chose to come here, so your soul chose to be sexually abused as a child, or like, you know what I mean? There's a way that we can talk about that that feels really tender, feels really sticky,
Hmm.
and feels really, I don't know, victim blaming or
Right.
something. So I want to be just very careful as, or just mindful how we talk about that.
Sure.
Because no human child asks for that, right? No human
No.
deserves.
No. That's right.
Um, and we're never going to say that that's okay. We're never going to, say that whatever, the sort of
Yeah.
tropey, everything happens for a reason or whatever. Like,
Hmm.
even though there might be such a thing as post-traumatic growth, and there
Hmm.
is an opportunity for you to come through that experience and understand your always and already truth
Hmm.
in a really powerful way.
Right.
Um,
Right. I I see that also as how things can be taken out of context because we know that happens so easily, perhaps more so now, post-COVID and mental health coming online, and all of those pieces have made it so much more palatable and easy to just snip out that small cluster of words out of that sentence to
that's
give
right.
it a whole different meaning. So
Right.
there are lots of things out there that I think need to be brought to the table and put into the right context. Because I think everything that you've said is actually true, and there's a lot of validation behind it for in the for argument and the against argument,
Right.
but it
And
needs context
you and
and
I
a holistic approach to look at it.
Yeah, I think the other piece that I come to from this um, is I was raised in a what I experienced to be a pretty dogmatic Christian church, a pretty
Mhm,
shame-based
mhm,
Christian church.
mhm.
And I've had to deconstruct that and sort of
Sure.
re find my way back to a spiritual practice that feels more in alignment.
Yes.
And for a long time it was anti any kind of spirituality because it just felt so
Mhm,
yucky and
mhm,
gaslighty and shamey and whatever. And so for me, my spirituality has to hold paradox. It
mhm,
has to hold the both and. It has to hold the dark and the light, the good and the bad, you know, the
mhm.
this I think a lot of what I consider to be misguided religious dogma, shame-based belief is really our discomfort and our desire for certainty.
Right.
And so that dogmatic spiritual lens of right, wrong, good, bad, not,
Sure.
righteousness, not righteousness. Man, our traumatic brains, our limbic system brains, that is like a drug, right? Our
Mhm.
limbic system is like, woo, certainty? Yes, please. Like, right, I get to be
Right.
right and good, and I get to be guaranteed heaven, yes,
Yeah.
sign me up.
Right.
And, if we look at just the brain structure, the part of the brain that is organized around good, bad, safe, not safe
Hmm.
is the limbic system.
Yeah.
Our frontal lobes they're much more able to hold nuance, to
Hmm.
hold both and to hold that there can be good in what we consider to be bad. There can be a little bit of shadow in what we consider to be good. And there's paradox,
Hmm.
and we can hold the brutality and the beauty together in the same breath.
Hmm.
And any spiritual practice for me, needs to be able to hold that paradox, needs to be
Right.
able to hold uncertainty. And anytime anybody's saying, whether it's in the therapy world or in the spiritual world,
Mm.
this is the only way,
No.
I will run the other direction. And
Right.
you and your listeners have my permission, should you need it, to run the other direction as well.
Sure.
Anybody who says this is the only way, this is the only way,
Right.
is
Yeah.
selling you something.
Yeah. And perhaps not, maybe not speaking to the bigger holistic approach of who we truly are,
Right.
because that's just segmenting it, right?
Totally. And again, I view that through the lens of trauma
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, when we think about ancestral trauma, when we
Mm-hmm.
think about, generational trauma, I really view dogma, certainty, overdeveloped individualism, urgency, perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
as collective responses to really unhealed generational patterns. And trauma is this very myopic, tunnel visioned way of being in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so when people view the world as very black or white, good or bad, right or wrong, um, I view that I make the assumption that their system is really organized around protection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's some kind of wound, whether that be in their personal life or in their family line or in their generational line or in the collective
Mm-hmm.
ethos that we're
Mm-hmm.
all swimming in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to go a little deeper on that.
Yeah.
In ultimately, we are the element of a collective.
Yeah.
So whether we do our myopic work ourselves on what our own soul journey is and what it is we're here to evolve, heal, and transform in our own ancestral lineage and where we are, there's still going to be a fragment of us that is feeling all that collective trauma, whether you and
Yep.
I have been on this road of self-discovery and healing and transformation for however many decades, to those who
Hmm.
blue, that are just in that zone of I'm living my materialistic capitalism life, and there is nothing after I die, and this is it.
Right. Right.
So we're feeling all of that, and we're still living it, and we're still part of
Oh,
all of those, not to be in a martyrdom state,
yeah.
that we're helping them, but to recognize we're in this, I was going to say dome, but essentially a dome
Yeah.
of all these collective energies that are bouncing off of each other.
Oh my gosh, for sure. Yeah. And I always say to people, like, you're gonna be impacted. Like, no matter what your self-care routine is, or your emotional boundaries and your energetic boundaries and the work that you're doing, like, you're not a robot. You are going to be impacted by the collective.
Yeah,
And we also impact the collective.
yeah,
So, like, the work that you're doing on a personal level matters.
sure.
And I do invite people, and I really think COVID, the light of COVID, the gift of COVID, I think a lot of us, if we hadn't sort of had this collective lens before, it
Mhm.
really highlighted how deeply connected we are to one
Right.
another, how much we affect one another. And that was both through COVID and through the Black Lives Matter movement.
Hmm.
You know, I
Hmm.
think a lot of white folks and people in white bodies for the first time ever were thinking about collective consciousness,
Right.
what it would mean to collectively heal.
Yes.
And I'm I mean, I'm sure a lot of people were like, "Oh, are you thinking about that now? That's nice." You know, great. But I'm also hopeful that more people, I think, than ever before in any time in human history have this idea that we are connected to each other.
Right.
And really, if you think about the span of human history and the general collective philosophy, it it was,
It's massive.
everything is the gods for a long time. And then it was like, we are separate,
Hmm.
we're just science and matter and,
Hmm.
the philosophy of Descartes and like whatever. And
Hmm.
then very recently, we have really come to understand that, we are all interconnected to each other.
Right.
So
Right.
I am hopeful, even though I think we have a long way to go to pull that arc of humanity closer to unity, closer to equity, closer to love.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I'm hopeful that many more people are tapped into this idea and this truth
Yeah,
that we are all connected to each other.
absolutely. And I think it will, and I think they will, but I also lean into it of that's their soul's journey.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that'll happen in due time. And just like you said, we can't all be in a white room with white light because we
Mhm.
need the polarity and we need the contrast in order for those experiences to happen. So there's going to be, I don't know, maybe 8, maybe 7 billion, maybe 5 billion people in the world who just don't see the light for the
Yeah,
metaphor.
right.
And we need that too.
Totally. And here's another permission, like from a human perspective, you can hold that people are doing the best that they can,
Hmm.
that they too are a reflection of the divine, that they are also always and already enough. And if they are not doing their own work, you have the right to set boundaries around their
Oh yeah,
behavior, right?
absolutely.
You do not have to, being in love, being in compassion, being in
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
idea that we're all connected doesn't mean that you just put up with shitty behavior, right?
No, you don't. Yeah, no, 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 no. No, we're not looking for martyrdom and to score badges that I survived this many years of a toxic relation. No, 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 no.
Yeah,
No.
right,
Self-preservation is a real thing and it's needed, and people need to recognize it for what it is for themselves because it's only the individual that's going through the journey and nobody else. Mhm.
right, right.
Yeah. So with that being said, How did you recognize that this is part of your calling at this current juncture of your life to support people in this journey?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it just unfolded really natural. As I look back on it now, I can see certain steps that I couldn't really see the full picture of until much later, which is pretty common, right, in this
Yeah.
human journey. But, as I said, I'm an adopted person. I'm a queer person that was rejected by the church, had to sort of navigate that. And then my mom, my adoptive mom, who was really my primary attachment, she was really just a lovely human. And she was a childhood sexual abuse survivor
Mm.
and really didn't have access to healing. I think she did for the generation that she did a pretty damn good job of
Mm.
trying to heal that, trying to talk to us about it, trying to talk to me and my brother about our bodies, about sex, about all of that, which, in some ways she was really ahead of her time. And, she was a drinker and I became a drinker. And
Right.
the drinking, kind of hooked into my own attachment wounding, and hooked into her, like, and then she was my primary attachment and we would drink together. So it was just this sort of layer of alcohol becoming hooked into that shame-based identity. It
Yes.
becomes the relationship. And after she died, it was really hard to look at some of the things that she did that were, it's not her fault, but because of her own unhealed stuff, she passed some unhealthy behaviors and unhealthy patterns down to me.
Mhm.
And so because I loved her so much, it was so hard to look at some of the shadows of that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but through EMDR, through parts work, and then really what I feel like kind of kicked it over into a new level of healing was doing some psychedelic medicine work. I did some ketamine assisted psychotherapy, which I'm now trained in, and then worked with a couple of other medicines as well. But really, ketamine assisted psychotherapy um, allowed me to kind of get my baby self in a way that I was never able to really contact my adopted baby rejected
Hmm.
self
Hmm.
and scoop her up and reclaim her.
Hmm.
And I also remember a journey where I truly felt like my mom's spirit was processing through her own sexual abuse ancestrally through that medicine journey. Like she was sort of using me
Yeah.
as the conduit with permission. Like she was like, and it was like I was processing her abuse for her. And after that journey, I have been able to feel her spirit, feel her presence in a much clearer way
Right.
than
Right.
I have. It's like I feel her joy.
Yeah.
I feel her clearing. And that's wild stuff. Like who the hell knows what's happening? But and some of your listeners are like, "Ooh, this lady's crazy." But I really attribute ketamine therapy. I'm going to be 4 years alcohol free in September, and that was just a really huge turning point. Like I feel like getting sober from alcohol, doing medicine work, healing that some of that ancestral trauma, um, it was the key component in actually being able to shift that shame-based belief that we talked about at the beginning.
Hmm.
So following the thread of that and where I am now, the way that I'm working with clients now is so expansive and inspiring. Of course, we look at the trauma and the human side of things and the psychology of things. And I don't want to push any spiritual shit onto people or even ketamine work onto people. Like I'm always trying to meet people where they are
Sure.
first and foremost. And a lot of the clients who find me are the people that are ready to do more of
Yeah.
that deep, expansive, abyss like let's swim around in the nonlinear
Yeah.
places, in the spiritual places. And I really see it as, a lot of spiritual practitioners will talk about spiritual practice as the thing that's going to heal you. And I actually sort of flip that on its head sometimes. It's like healing your nervous system and looking at your human traumas and going through the humanity of it all
Hmm.
is actually the thing that might open you up to
Right.
a deeper spiritual connection. And
Right.
that's where spiritual practice can help heal that. It's sort of like an infinity sign, right? Like,
Hmm.
but healing your nervous system just might be the most spiritual thing that you can do for yourself,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question. I think I answered it in a very expansive,
Beautiful.
tangential
It's
way. But
no, it's perfect.
that's where I land with people. And again, some people are just doing EMDR, they're just doing therapy, straight, psychology pieces, and that's beautiful work, and that's
That
where they
works too.
are.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but
Yeah.
a lot of people are dipping their toes into that realm of spirituality, reclaiming spirituality. I work
Yeah.
with a lot of people who have similar histories of really feeling a lot of toxic religion, toxic shame-based spiritual religion, and even, of course, big T traumas like sexual abuse
Sure.
from and cult-like things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they're deconstructing, and really having to reclaim and kind of rummage through the wreckage of their spiritual lives and reclaim what feels aligned for them.
Sure. Sure. With all this heavy work, because it is pretty heavy, right? It's pretty,
Yeah.
be it the science perspective or the real 3D mind component of it to the spiritual components of it. How do you stay balanced? What is it that you put into place for you so you can stay on purpose and stay in alignment and stay clear to be that open vessel for clients?
Well, I will say that again, I'm not a robot either, and no matter I am impacted by this work.
Mhm.
I and a lot of times it's like I'm feeling the clearing and feeling the
Yep.
work as well, sort of that
Hmm.
parallel process. And most of it is just really inspiring. So the way that I work, I don't feel like I work in this martyry way where my energy is being drained and
Right.
siphoned off.
Right. Yes.
Um, it's really rooted in equity and reciprocity. And I'm just holding the space and laying the right conditions for the clients to do their own process. So the way that I work is much different than I was as a baby therapist. I think a lot of therapists come from that charity mindset, that martyry mindset, that
Mm.
rescuing mindset, want to fix other people mindset. Um, and I really had to switch that and realize how disempowering that was for clients. It's
Hmm.
saying, like, oh, you need me to help you. You need me to rescue you. Without me, and really what I'm saying is like, you can't handle your own
Yeah.
affairs.
Yeah.
So robbing them of their autonomy when I'm in that place. So one,
Right.
shifting from that mindset is really helpful. Um, I also, which is another thing that I do, but I also direct musical theater for kids, and that's really fun. That brings a lot of levity and joy in my life. My kids and my partner are really like sources of joy in my life. My kids keep me laughing and keep me young and keep me, like I think in trauma, organized nervous systems,
Yeah.
silliness and play is very underdeveloped. And for a long time, I think I was overdeveloped in seriousness. um, I might have been like funny or self-deprecatingly funny, but I might not have been so fun. Right? Like
Mm.
I
Right.
I I think I've always had sort of this personality, but I've been able to tap into like silliness, and my kids and I'll just like throw on some dance music and whatever, and
Yeah.
luckily they still want to snuggle with me,
Yeah.
and my kids and my friends who still will go dancing with me every once in a while, and like that's just moving my body,
Yeah.
getting nature. my own spiritual practice, you
Yeah.
know, even just every day, just like remembering that I'm just sort of this conduit for
Mm,
the work to come through, for spirit to come through, for energy to come through. And
mm.
I'm not doing anything
That's
to
right.
people.
That's
I'm
right.
just
Yeah.
attuning and aligning and holding space,
Yeah.
occasionally offering
Yes.
perspective or tools or whatever. But, you know, yeah,
So,
it's all of
it,
that.
so even though you say that, you're not doing anything, because we're in a similar kind of work, right? I do similar work in terms of the energetics, the mentorship, the guidance. Even though we're not doing, we are doing.
It's a both, it's the paradox, right? Yes, we are. Of course we are.
So
We are,
I'm not saying here's a prescription, this is what you do, even though I kind of do in terms of action steps and
oh,
guidance,
yeah, of
but we're
course.
not doing, but the how we show up is an element of doing.
Totally. Totally. Yes, agree. I think it's just that both and,
Because
right?
it can often be misconstrued as we're not doing anything, so therefore, why do I need that person?
100%. And what we are doing or what we are offering,
Mhm.
and this is why I'm not really worried about AI robot
No,
therapists.
no, no. Yeah, no,
I'm
no,
not
I'm
really
not.
worried about that because what is happening is that I am offering a regulated nervous system that
Hmm.
has also done her own work and
Hmm.
has walked through the
Very
central
important.
fires.
Yeah,
And I have a capacity for pain
yeah,
and beauty and showing up with attunement
that's
and
right.
alignment and care and love, really,
Right.
that is a missing experience for
Yeah.
a lot of people. And so the fact that I have that capacity, the fact that I can show up in a regulated system, that I'm not afraid of going towards the pain
Right.
is something that I
Yes,
am, quote unquote, doing.
that's
And it's
right.
why, I can't, even though I know this work, I also cannot do this work alone. I
Right.
have to go to my therapist
Absolutely.
or my space holder or whatever because e- I have this sort of catchphrase that I say a lot, which is trauma doesn't give a shit what we know. We
Hmm.
can know
Hmm.
all kinds of things.
Hmm.
We can read the books and we can cognitively understand and we can psychoanalyze ourselves. But that is not where transformation happens.
Yeah.
Transformation happens in having another human being witnessing and holding our pain so that we can also become our own witnesses and our own primary attachments so that you can do a little bit of this work on your
Hmm.
own.
Hmm.
But, it again, another both and that I often talk about is like only you can do it
Yeah.
and you can't do it alone.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So yes, I agree. It's like we are doing something. We are offering something of high value.
Mhm.
Our work has value
Mhm.
and it's important. And you
Absolutely.
can't, if texting therapists is all that you can afford, do what you need to do.
That's
But
right.
that is not going to get at the deepest levels of transformation.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree. We bring value, we are doing, and we're not doing.
That's right. That's right. Because I'm sure you've witnessed it. I know I witnessed it in my earlier days, very, very early days of coming from a place of pain. And you try and have a conversation with somebody who has the same amount of pain. That conversation is not going to go up.
Yeah,
It's going to
right.
go down real fast.
Hmm.
So we can lean into friends, partners, community, and all of those people and places to have that dialogue, to feel like we can lean on friends. What are friends? If we can't have this kind of conversation, then I'm questioning all the people in my life and in my community. However, recognizing who are the right people to have these kind of conversations
Mm.
without burdening others in that space. I often talk about this too, because just because we are friends, it doesn't mean you need to have my bag of rocks and you need to deal with them because you're my bud. Like,
Right,
no.
right,
Mm-mm.
right. Yeah, I often, my friends and I are kind of in the habit of asking for, like, are you in a place where I could
Yeah,
process with you, like getting consent.
right.
Do you have capacity right now? And
Exactly.
we have an agreement. Like if we say that we're not, it's not a personal rejection. It's just that we're at capacity.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah. And something else that you talked about is that I want to name is, I think Western culture in general, again, I think through this ancestral line, is not great at collective community and supporting each other. We have this real overdeveloped sense of individualism and perfectionism and this idea that we should be able to do it by ourselves, that
Mm-hmm.
we shouldn't need help, that we shouldn't ever lean on people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so tricky because of that. Yes, only you can do it, and you can't do it alone.
Right.
And we do need collective support.
Yeah.
The traumas and the brutality that we are carrying in this human life can't be carried by ourselves.
No.
When we carry them collectively, they become much lighter.
Yes.
And not only are we, carrying the burdens, but then when we're collectively working towards something, when we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, magic happens, right? We can really become the it, the what
Yeah.
we are creating becomes so much more expansive and colorful and magical. And if we're trying to solve that on our own individual shoulders, if we're trying to solve the world's problems on our own individual shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
And we really have to question how individualism is blocking that. Of course, there's a piece of individualism that I love. Like I want to follow my own dreams. I want to, just because your father was a farmer, you have to become a farmer. F that, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
certain things about individualistic
Mm-hmm.
culture that have beauty to them.
Right.
And we have to recognize how the lack of community and the lack of collective carrying.
Yeah. Has influenced that hugely, but that's I also see that as part of a Western world culture.
For sure. Yes.
That bigger influences have been had on how we live, how we breathe, how we move through the world, how we go to work, and
Totally.
all of those spaces, be it in the corporate space or not, that is where I've seen the big shift. Well, not shift, but I've seen the differences between the world in the Western world. And even though I was born and raised in Britain, I see a little bit of what's going on in India as my heritage country and how they live and other countries and spaces that are not defined as first world
Yeah.
and how much community is important there. And people try to bring it here as immigrants. And you just see that shift, and it really makes you question, do we have, as a society, do we have this bigger craving to have it all?
Mm.
We
Mhm.
want all of the AI, the tech, and the Western and the medicine and all of that, but we also want community. And is it a have all or have nothing? Is it a balance? Like all
Yeah.
of that, what is your intentions with your practice and your service offering? And how do you see that with your crafts that you've kind of garnered over
Yeah.
the years?
I think it's unwritten. I think we are collectively reimagining
Uh-huh.
that question, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And my guidance is to find the values that you want to at least guide the unfolding of that.
Okay.
So, for me, the values collectively that I hope we that we hope we reimagine towards
Yeah.
are equity, reciprocity, accountability, connection, interconnectivity.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm sure I'm missing something, but those are, and so
Sure.
even just noticing the word interconnectivity and just noticing that in your body and feeling like our connection between you and I right now, and like imagining the larger web of the collective. And if I was really embodying that value of interconnectivity and reciprocity, giving and receiving love freely, what would those values be guiding us as a collective
Right.
towards reimagining? So,
Right.
I think we are in co-creation with the spirit, with the universe, with each other,
Yeah.
and and we're doing our own individual work. But if we can hold those embodied values, I think we got a shot. I
Hmm. Hmm.
think we've got a shot.
But in
So,
that, before we get there, perhaps there's a greater opportunity for us to reflect and introspect on self.
oh, yes. And collectively, what does accountability collectively
Mm.
actually look like?
Mhm.
Because that's where repair happens.
Yeah,
That's where trust happens, where communities that have traditionally not been very kind to each other or there's been
sure.
dominance, how does accountability, reflection, and repair actually take place in the collective?
Yeah.
And, that's going to take a shift in our collective nervous system. And that's going to require us to do our individual work so that we
Hmm.
can stay calm-ish
Yeah,
when we're in conflict, right? That we can stay regulated-ish when we're in courageous conversation with each other,
that's right.
take breaks when we need to, and hopefully try to like bring silliness and play back in, because we are also here to enjoy the
Yes,
experience as well.
exactly. Exactly. As heavy as it is, I often find that too in having that silliness show up in my client calls, even.
Yeah.
Because we need that balance, right? We keep going back to that word balance of there's a polarity in the world, it's a universal law. It's got to come into play in everything that we do, what we think, what we feel, what we breathe, and how we
Right.
move through the world. It's it's got to be a balance in order for it to offset. Otherwise, like you said right at the beginning of the conversation, we're just going to be heady, um, focused, and just serious people walking through life, and
And
it's not
sometimes
meant to be
like
like that.
putting on some Prince and dancing around naked in your kitchen is going to do you way more good than your
Therapy.
$180 therapy session. Like,
Absolutely.
I promise you, like, you're just like, sometimes you
Yeah.
just need, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say way more liberating, but yeah, I guess it probably is. It probably is for some.
It doesn't have to be naked. It's okay. You can put clothes on if you need to.
Erica, you just gave me a visual there. Yeah, okay.
I think we should end there. I think we should end on
Yeah.
dancing naked to your kitchen.
Well, or at least dance like nobody's watching.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All
Right?
right,
That's a safe enough adage we can use.
all right.
Dance that so nobody's watching. But if you can go naked, then go for it. Why not? Fun. What's next for you?
Oh gosh, I do have a book coming out. I'm actually sending it to my professional editing team tomorrow,
Ooh,
hopefully.
congrats.
Um, and it's called Always Enough, Never Done, which hopefully
Mm.
makes sense in the
Yes.
context of our conversation. Um, and it's actually going to be in two volumes. Volume one is going to be that internal work, that, internal shadow, individual level. And then volume two will build on that foundation, moving into the relational piece, the collective piece, spiritual
Ooh,
piece, that whole realm. So
beautiful.
I really hope the book is, just like lands in the hands of people that it feels aligned, that it can just help deepen the work. And I love to do trainings, speaking gigs. I love talking to groups of people, building on that collective idea of pulling this arc closer to those values.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm great. I'm so grateful for my clients. The work that they're doing is really beautiful. So I just have my little fingers in lots of different lots of different pies. I love my work. I love speaking. I love writing. I love the musical theater piece,
Beautiful.
and I just kind of cruising along this world.
I love it. I love
Yeah,
it. And it's beautiful because you get to be the joyful self, is what I'm hearing in all that you do.
yeah. And you know what though? Like I've learned that the part of me that holds that shame is so sweet. Like I I not that I want people to be shameful, but my favorite people are the people that have walked through some of this, right?
Mhm.
That have some depth to them, that have
Mhm.
some parts
Yeah.
of them that feel like they don't belong. And those parts that feel like they don't belong are like the best parts of us. They're the
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
unique parts.
Yeah.
And so I've really learned to appreciate
Yeah.
that part of me. And she like
Beautiful.
comes along with me and she's like learning that we're actually not a piece of shit. We're actually pretty cool and we're gonna be okay. And like she's all right. She's doing all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the important part. Because once you're in tandem with that relationship, then you can hold space for others.
totally. And I can align both with the parts that are unhealed in them and the parts that are totally badass and resilient. Like
That's right. Yeah.
both parts can be here. Yeah.
Because you can see the full spectrum of it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Beautiful.
I'm so grateful
Wonderful.
for this conversation. My
Yeah.
heart is lit up and I'm
Love it.
inspired and
I
I
love it.
appreciate it so
Yeah.
much.
And likewise, thank you for sharing your story, your journey, and all the nuggets of wisdom you shared. So I appreciate it. Thank you so
Yes,
much,
thank
Erica.
you. Oh, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.